Hi, and welcome to the presentation about my Algebra 1 Comprehensive, the flipped version. This is my E-initiative, and it will start with looking at the initiative itself, and then I will give a tour of the website. The goal for my initiative was to create a class site that would promote a semi-flipped classroom for my remedial Algebra 1 class. Right now in this class, I have a lot of students on very different grade levels, and due to the immense diversity, most of my students are either left behind or they're bored. So I wanted to find a way to reach all of my students at their own pace, and I decided to create a website to do this. And on this website, there will be learning components, different practices, different tutorials that students can learn at their own pace in a way that suits them best. The stakeholders involved in my initiative are students, parents, and teachers. And the main learning objectives for this portion of my initiative are how to describe and use one-variable equations and how to solve one- and two-step equations. I'd like to start by looking at the website itself and give you an overview. This is the main homepage with navigations at the bottom explained. At the top, we look at our class page. There are different weeks depending on which week we're in. I'm going to start with looking at parents. An important part for me was to include information for my parents. They tend to not know what's going on in the class or what's required for graduation. So in this page, parents can learn what's required in the class, what topics we're covering. They can also read about the Maryland HSA graduation requirements, and I've included a link to another page with more information. Back on the main page, we also have how to contact the instructor, and I've included my email and both a contact form on the website. Now, if we go to the class page, just by clicking on class, we can look at the expectations for my students. So what to expect with their learning, how to be successful, participation requirements, course protocols for contacting the instructor, turning in homework, and submitting homework online, using the online form and discussion board, and then I've also included an assignment form at the bottom of the page. So if students do have homework they're submitting online, they know where to find that. Let's take a look at the first week. Introductions. So this is my introductions page, and I'm going to jump back and look at what the overview is. So for my first week, I anticipate this being the first week of school, August 27th through September 1st of this fall. Our objectives are to create a set of classroom rules. Students will introduce themselves, submit contact information, and describe why the rules are important and how we use them. The e-learning components specifically will be to fill out a personal survey online, introduce themselves on the discussion board, try using the online contact form by sending me their parents' contact information, share their thoughts about the classroom rules in our discussion online, and respond to their peers' posts. The face-to-face components augment the online learning components. We share our opinions about classroom rules. We can discuss why and how rules will be implemented, including consequences. And then my students will work in a team of 3 to create a poster for one rule, which I'll hang in the classroom. And then they will present their rule to the class, either acting or explaining why it's important. A measure of success for this week will be that students are able to describe why we have classroom rules and why they're important. Students will take ownership of these rules by adhering to them and agreeing with the consequences. Let's take a look now at this website. So my introduction website, we have just an overview of what we're doing, a reminder to read the rules about doing an online discussion, and then a list of assignments for this week. So again, students are expected to complete the contact form by Friday, respond to 2 prompts, their introductions and the class rules, and both of those due dates are given, as well as a due date for responding to classroom feedback. Finally, students are asked to fill out a brief survey about themselves. And down here we have the contact form they'll use to submit their parent contact information, the survey about themselves, and the discussion board. Now, if we move into the second week where we actually get into topics, we're going to be discussing one variable equations, and this will be September 2nd through September 9th. The objectives for this unit will be to understand the function of a one variable equation within a real world context, and then write and solve 1- and 2-step equations. Online, students are expected to view the Khan Academy tutorial videos, practice new concepts with the Khan Academy practice games, log into and use the IXL practice, and then take a practice Edpuzzle quiz, and finally an actual Edpuzzle quiz. The face-to-face components for this part are students will continue to practice skills throughout the week and engage in mini lectures, so I will continue to lecture in the class and not rely just on the video tutorials. Students will select a prompt and work in a team of 2 or 3 to describe real-world scenarios where they'll be applying their use of one variable equations. They'll then present their poster to the class while the other students critique and provide positive feedback. Students will also complete a 10-question quiz at the end of the week on one variable equations. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the website. Here we have the main website for week 1, where we're actually getting into the learning and the meat of Algebra 1. So we can see I've given some advice to look ahead. We have our dates, our objectives for this week, basically by topic, and then our actual learning objectives, the checklist with due dates, and then we get into the assignments. So my students will be able to click on an assignment, and it takes them to the video tutorial to watch for Khan Academy. They're all in order, so students can go through, or they can go back to the website and click on the next link. Included in that website are the examples and exercises. Assignment 2 is to use their IXL account. They will receive their username and password in class. They would log in up here. Just to give a brief overview of what this looks like, I'm going to click on the math, go down to Algebra 1, and my students were assigned the J standards. So if we go down to the J standards, we have solving equations. What's really great about this IXL program is that it provides students the ability to practice at their own level and at their own pace. Given the first equation, if I pick something, submit my answer, I got it wrong. But IXL recognizes that it's incorrect, provides the solution and explanation of how to do the problem correctly, and then it adjusts the next question to meet the level of the student. As the student progresses, their SMART score will increase, and this is the measure of mastery. Once the score reaches 80%, I allow my students to move on to the next topic. So students are asked to work through 6 standards, and they take about 20 minutes apiece. Next, we have the Edpuzzle assignments with directions of how to use the website and log in. And there are 2 quizzes this week. One is a practice quiz that also provides information on how to solve a problem. And the second one is the actual quiz itself. And there are 2 questions about spotting an error, in which students will spot the error, explain it, and correct it. Finally, students are asked to post a response to the discussion prompt, why we use equations. At the bottom of the page, we can see our discussion board. So I'm going to go back to my presentation and talk about why these components are important. The online IXL practice, as I've stated before, is adaptive, and I really like this program because it provides pacing for my students. Students that need to work at a slower pace and need more practice problems are provided with those, while students that excel can work more quickly and move on to the next standard without having to wait for the class. The online tutorials are great because they provide an alternative representation of the problem, and they give multiple viewpoints on how to solve. These are really great to augment my lectures. The Edpuzzle quizzes I think are fun. It's a multimedia presentation that's engaging for the students. Instead of taking just a paper quiz, they actually get to watch a video and learn from it. The discussion board is nice because students, oh, I've lost my page. The discussion board is nice because students can brainstorm their ideas collaboratively before they come to class, and I find that having an idea before you come to class really promotes participation and confidence. Behind the face-to-face components, the independent practice throughout the week will be much like IXL, and if I can get the computers in class, I'd like to have them on IXL. And that just gives them more opportunity to practice, and I'll be present so that they can ask me questions. The group discussion is a great way to get students to knowledge to stick. I found that when students talk about learning, they understand it better, and we can help clarify misunderstandings and delve more deeply into what a one-variable equation is. The poster project presentation is another way for students to engage with the learning and with each other. I thought it would be wonderful to have kids synthesize their learning, presentation skills, and their practice all together and explain it to another student. The measures of success for this week, I have qualitative and quantitative goals. My students are engaged with the discussion. They're confidently sharing their opinions. They're asking inquisitive questions, and they're demonstrating curiosity. I would also like to see my students viewing the practices more than once, the videos more than once. And that's something great about all of the practices I've chosen. The Ed Puzzle, Khan Academy, and IXL all have teachers' accounts in which I can track my students' progress. The quantitative goals I have is that all students participate on time with the appropriate products. So they're posting their discussions on time, they're viewing their practices when they're supposed to, and they're completing their assignments. At least 80% of my students earn an 80% on their IXL standards. So hopefully all of them, but at least 80%. Same goes for the quiz. At least 80% of my students have an 80% or higher on the quiz. Overall, for this week, I'd like to be able to see students describe how and why we use one-variable equations in the real world, and how we can manipulate them to gather information. The last part of the initiative I'd like to go over are the facilitator and student expectations. I think this is a really important part that we discussed in class that tends to get overlooked. Briefly, as a facilitator, it's really important that I stay on top of my students. I'll monitor all the participation online and possibly give them a worksheet every day explaining what they haven't done and have done. I've decided that I'd like to include a tracker and have parents sign off on the participation of the online components. I also need to demonstrate how to use the online components and offer assistance throughout, and that means staying in contact with my parents and my students at home. I'd like to monitor and provide supportive redirecting comments on the discussion board, make sure my students are on task, and post clear expectations in the checklist for each week. Students, in brief, are expected to participate in all online components by assigned due dates and to put their best effort forward into each assignment. I also expect them to ask me if they need help and to participate in class discussions and projects. Finally, a tough part, but I know I can stay on top of it, is to get them to respond to their online discussions. Overall, I'm really excited to see my class website in action, and I hope that I can reach my students. Ideally, all of them will be able to pace themselves correctly and get through the class. Hopefully, some of my students can even excel and get onto the geometry topics. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thanks so much for your feedback.